Welcome to our deep dive, specifically designed for business leaders like you folks, navigating the incredibly complex world of climate risk governance.
Absolutely, and how to make sure your board is, doing their due diligence in this area.
Right.
That's why we are going to focus on the DCRO Institute's 5 checkpoints on your board's oversight of climate risk.
Exactly. We're going to unpack some of the key insights and hopefully give you some actionable takeaways to enhance your board's climate competence.
And we're talking moving beyond just awareness to action.
And the DCRO Institute kicks things off with a pretty simple question. Do we understand climate challenges as 3 types of risk?
Yeah.
But as I was reading through the material, it's a lot more nuanced than it first appears.
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's about recognizing that climate risk isn't one thing.
Right.
It's not a monolith.
Yeah.
It's a whole spectrum. And the DCRO Institute breaks it down into these 3 distinct types. You've got the physical, the transition, and the liability.
Right.
And, they each present their own unique challenges, but they're also all interconnected.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so important to understand the interplay between them.
Okay, so let's delve into each of these risks, starting with physical risks.
Sure.
The report highlights acute risks, like hurricanes, and chronic risks, like rising sea levels.
Right.
How should boards be thinking about the differences between those two?
Well, it's about preparing for both the sudden shocks
Right.
and the gradual long-term shifts. So, for example, a company with coastal operations needs to be thinking about both the immediate impact of, say, a hurricane, and then also the long-term implications of rising sea levels on their infrastructure.
Got it.
Those kinds of things.
So it's not just about disaster recovery, it's about adapting to a changing environment.
Exactly. And that brings us to transition risk,
Okay.
which the DCRO Institute describes as basically the risks and opportunities associated with the shift to a lower carbon economy. So things like changing regulations or the rise of new technologies and even shifting consumer preferences.
And there's that term stranded assets, which really struck me when I was reading the report.
It's a powerful image, right?
Yeah. Could you elaborate a bit on that concept and what it means for businesses?
Sure. So imagine a company that's really heavily invested in fossil fuels.
Right.
As the world transitions to cleaner energy sources, those assets could lose value really quickly.
Yeah.
Leaving that company in a really tough spot financially.
Vulnerable.
Yeah. Boards need to be proactive in assessing their exposure to this type of risk and adapting their business models.
So it highlights how climate change isn't just an environmental concern.
Right.
It's a core economic issue.
It really is. And then finally, you have liability risk,
Right.
which the DCRO Institute frames in terms of the legal and reputational consequences of failing to address climate change.
And this is where things get personal for board members.
Oh, absolutely.
They explicitly mention directors' and officers' liability.
Yes. Boards are increasingly being held accountable for their actions or inaction on climate change.
Right.
Failure to demonstrate due diligence in managing climate risks could result in lawsuits, regulatory scrutiny, damage to the company's reputation.
So simply being aware of these 3 types of risk isn't enough.
Right.
Boards need to be actively managing them.
Precisely, and that's really where those remaining checkpoints come into play.
Okay, so let's move on to checkpoint 2. Do we have engagement, compliance, and a fit-for-purpose board? This seems to be all about ensuring the board itself is up to the task of governing climate risk effectively and communicating that effectively.
Yeah, they really emphasize stakeholder engagement. You've got investors, regulators, customers, even employees communicating your climate strategy builds trust.
Okay, but why should boards be prioritizing communication about climate risk? Shouldn't their primary focus be on shareholder value?
That's a common misconception.
Wow.
Investors are increasingly considering climate risk when they're making decisions. A company that ignores this is likely to face a higher cost of capital difficulty, attracting investment, and, reputational damage.
So strong climate governance actually aligns with shareholder value.
In the long run.
Yes.
In the long run.
And the DCRO Institute actually suggests establishing a stakeholder advisory board
Interesting.
to ensure capital providers have a voice on climate-related matters.
Okay, now let's talk about the fit-for-purpose board concept. The DCRO Institute lays out some key questions about board structure expertise and ongoing education.
Right.
What are your thoughts on this?
It's about making sure that the board has the right skills and knowledge
Right.
to navigate this complex issue. So, does the board structure explicitly address climate oversight, maybe through a dedicated committee? Do board members have relevant climate expertise? Is there a plan for ongoing climate education for the board?
And the DCRO Institute recommends a skills matrix that includes climate competencies to identify and address any gaps.
Yeah, it demonstrates a commitment to continuous improvement, which is vital in such a rapidly changing field. Okay, let's move on to checkpoint 3. How integrated is climate risk into the enterprise risk management program? Can you give us a quick overview of what ERM entails and why this checkpoint is so crucial?
Sure. So enterprise risk management, or ERM as it's often called,
Right.
is a structured approach to identifying, assessing, and managing all risks that a company faces.
Okay.
It's about viewing the company as a portfolio of risk-taking ventures,
Right.
as the DCRO Institute puts it, and making sure that climate risk is factored into that overall ERM process.
So we're talking about weaving climate considerations into the very fabric of how a company assesses and manages risk.
Exactly. And to do this effectively, they highlight the importance of assessing climate impacts on every aspect of your business,
Okay.
from operations and assets to supply chains and stakeholder relationships.
So it's about thinking holistically,
Yeah,
not just about the direct impacts, but the ripple effects as well.
precisely. And one of the most effective tools that they recommend is scenario analysis. By modeling different climate trajectories and their potential impacts, you can understand the range of possible outcomes and develop strategies to mitigate those risks and capitalize on opportunities.
This is where things start to get really interesting. Instead of just reacting to events, we're talking about proactively shaping the future.
So, as we were saying, incorporating climate scenario analysis into that ERM process allows you to move from a reactive stance to a proactive one.
That's a really powerful concept. And it brings us to checkpoint 4. Do we think broadly enough about climate risk resiliency? We've assessed the risks, but now the question becomes, how do we prepare for the inevitable disruptions and build a business that can weather the storm, both figuratively and literally?
The DCRO Institute really emphasizes that resilience goes beyond simply mitigating risk. It's about building that capacity to adapt, to evolve, and even thrive in the face of change.
It's about turning challenges into opportunities. The source material talks about empowerment and agility. Could you elaborate on what that looks like in practice?
Sure. So think about it this way. A company that's overly centralized, very bureaucratic,
Right.
may struggle to respond effectively to sudden climate-related events. The DCRO Institute really highlights the importance of distributing authority,
Okay.
empowering people at all levels to make decisions quickly.
So it's about fostering a culture of responsiveness and agility.
Exactly, and that could involve things like creating, rapid response teams equipped to deal with specific climate-related challenges, whether it's a supply chain disruption or an extreme weather event.
The DCRO Institute also emphasizes the importance of strong stakeholder relationships for building resilience. Why is that?
Because resilience isn't just about internal processes, it's also about that external support.
Yeah.
Having strong relationships with your suppliers, your customers, the local communities, even regulators can provide a crucial buffer during times of crisis. They're going to be more likely to be understanding and supportive if they see you're taking climate risk seriously and you're actively working to mitigate it.
So it's not just about weathering the storm, it's about having a strong network to help you rebuild afterward.
Precisely. And ultimately, building climate resilience is deeply intertwined with company culture.
Yeah.
As the DCRO Institute points out, it's about fostering that mindset of continuous learning, adaptation, and, openness to new ideas.
A company that's stuck in its ways and resistant to change is unlikely to thrive in a world that's being reshaped by climate change.
Exactly. And that brings us to that final checkpoint, which actually takes a more optimistic view.
Yes. Checkpoint 5. Are we welcoming of climate opportunities? This shifts the focus from risk to possibility. What does it mean to view climate change through an opportunity lens?
The DCRO Institute challenges boards to see climate action not as, just a cost or a burden,
Right.
but as a potential source of competitive advantage. Companies that proactively address climate change can unlock new markets, enhance their brand reputation, attract top talent, and even drive innovation.
The report provides several examples of how companies can benefit from embracing climate action.
Yeah.
Can you share a few that stand out to you?
Certainly. So one example is that growing market for sustainable products and services consumers are increasingly demanding, eco-friendly options. And companies that meet this demand are well positioned for growth. The DCRO Institute specifically mentions renewable energy as a key area of opportunity.
Yes. The shift to renewable energy is creating a whole new ecosystem of jobs and technologies and investment opportunities.
Precisely, and companies that get ahead of this curve can gain a significant competitive advantage.
So how can boards guide companies to capitalize on these emerging opportunities?
They emphasize the importance of strategic acquisitions.
Okay.
For example, a company could acquire a leading provider of renewable energy solutions or sustainable technologies to accelerate its transition to a low-carbon business model.
So it's about being proactive and making bold moves to position the company for success in a changing world.
Exactly. And the DCRO Institute also highlights the importance of focused experimentation.
Okay.
It's about creating a space where companies can test new ideas, learn from their failures, and iterate quickly. This type of agile approach is essential for staying ahead of the curve in such a rapidly evolving landscape.
It sounds like embracing climate opportunities requires a real shift in mindset from viewing climate action as a compliance exercise to seeing it as a strategic imperative.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the DCRO Institute's overarching message. Climate risk governance is not just about mitigating risks, it's about seizing opportunities and creating a more sustainable and prosperous future. And as we wrap up our exploration, I think it's important to circle back to that concept of duty of care that really resonates throughout the DCRO Institute's guidance.
Yeah.
It's a call to action for business leaders to kind of embrace a broader perspective, one that acknowledges the interconnectedness of business and society and the environment.
It's about recognizing that our decisions as business leaders have far-reaching consequences.
Yes.
Not just for our shareholders, but for a wide range of stakeholders, including employees and communities and future generations.
The DCRO Institute's framework encourages us to move beyond just a narrow focus on those short-term profits.
Right.
And embrace a more holistic view of success, one that takes into account the long-term well-being of all their stakeholders.
It's a powerful concept, this duty of care. But I imagine some business leaders might struggle with how to operationalize it.
Yeah.
How do you translate this broader perspective into concrete actions within their organization?
It starts with a fundamental shift in mindset, recognizing that climate risk isn't just an environmental issue, it's a core business issue.
Right.
The DCRO Institute emphasizes the need to integrate climate considerations into every aspect of the business, from strategic planning and risk management to supply chain operations and product development.
So it's not just about having a sustainability department.
Right.
Or issuing a corporate social responsibility report.
Yeah.
It's about weaving climate awareness and action into the very DNA of the organization.
Exactly. And it requires a commitment to transparency and accountability.
That's right.
Companies need to be open about their climate-related risks and opportunities, engage in a meaningful dialogue with their stakeholders, and measure and report on their progress towards those sustainability goals.
It's about moving beyond rhetoric and taking concrete steps to demonstrate a genuine commitment
Yes.
to sustainability.
And this might require companies to challenge, some long-held assumptions
Yeah.
and make some bold decisions that prioritize long-term value creation over those short-term gains.
It's about recognizing that sustainable practices are not just ethically sound, but they also make good business sense.
Absolutely. Companies that embrace this expanded view of duty of care are more likely to attract and retain top talent,
Right.
build stronger relationships with their customers and communities, and gain a competitive edge in a world that's increasingly focused on sustainability.
The DCRO Institute's 5 checkpoints provide a really practical framework for boards and business leaders to navigate this complex landscape. They offer a roadmap for not just mitigating risk, but also seizing opportunity and creating a more sustainable and prosperous future.
It's been an insightful journey exploring these 5 checkpoints.
It really has.
By understanding the nuances of climate risk, building resilience into our organizations, and embracing that mindset of opportunity, we can create a future where business and sustainability go hand in hand.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it valuable, and we encourage you to continue exploring the resources offered by the DCRO Institute to empower your board and drive meaningful change within your organization.